What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, and Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist. And it was a big night when it comes to the Eastern Conference and deciding the 4, 5, and 6 seeds in the Eastern Conference playoffs. So, why was it so serious? The Boston Celtics and the New York Knicks faced off in their final matchup of the regular season. The New York Knicks pulled out the victory and are now one game ahead of the Cavs for the 3rd seed, with the Cavs still slotted in at the number 4 seed. The second game that was extremely intriguing was the Toronto Raptors versus the Miami Heat. The Toronto Raptors are now in the number 5 seed after the Atlanta Hawks were home to the number 5 seed for the last couple of days, but they've been dropped down to the number 6 seed due to a tiebreaker between Toronto and Atlanta. With the New York Knicks beating the Celtics tonight, a Knicks win over the Toronto Raptors or a Cavs loss tomorrow night against the Atlanta Hawks would lock Cleveland into that number 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. Also, if the Raptors win their final 2 games against New York and Brooklyn, then they'll be the number 5 seed because of their tiebreaker ahead of the Atlanta Hawks. This is good news to, you guessed it, Chris Fedor, as he is not a fan of traveling to Atlanta, but Toronto is a prime travel city for our guy. Walk us through the final 2-game scenario and why you're of the belief that it's still a toss-up for who can be in the 5th seed, whether that be Toronto, whether that be Atlanta, and where your preference lies.
Here's what I just heard. With you saying that right there, I just heard that if the Cavs lose tomorrow against Atlanta, which is a possibility given what's available, the New York Knicks are going to be scoreboard watching, and they're going to be like, you know what? We don't need this game anymore. Get out of the game, Jalen Brunson. Get out of the game, everybody else, and give Toronto a win so that I can go to Toronto for the playoffs. I actually just got a text message from a fellow writer. Quote, "The path to Toronto is wide open for us." Yes, yes, it is. I don't think it's a given that Atlanta wins its next 2 games. Obviously, Friday night against the Cavs, it becomes easier for the Hawks. They're at home. It's probably going to be close to all hands on deck for Atlanta. The Cavs aren't going to have Donovan Mitchell, no Jared Allen, no Sam Merrill, no Thomas Bryant. We'll see about Jalen Tyson. So there are still areas where the Cavs can attack Atlanta and still potentially find a way to win that game. I'm not saying that it's going to happen, but Evan Mobley could go for 30 and 20 against the Hawks front court. Atlanta could be chilly shooting from 3-point range. There are some things that could happen. The Cavs still have some talented players in the lineup, albeit without Donovan Mitchell, Jared Allen. It certainly changes their chances of winning. In saying that, then Atlanta finishes in Miami. Where is the worst place where you could finish your NBA season? With the playoffs right around the corner and starting to focus in other directions, Miami, baby. Miami nightlife is undefeated. So Miami's playing terribly right now. Everybody sees that. They're in free fall mode. But they've got the true home court advantage, the best home court advantage in the entire NBA. It has nothing to do with their fan base whatsoever. It has to do with the nightlife. It has to do with all the distractions, all that kind of stuff. So whoever that guy is on NBC that tabulates the votes and tries to determine what's going to happen in the election, I don't remember his name, but in his own words, I'm not ready to call it yet. On top of that, we don't know what the motivation is going to be for the Knicks. They play against Toronto. Toronto has 2 games left. They've got the Knicks, and then they've got Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a win. Layup. Easy. Toronto's actually playing pretty good basketball right now. They're healthier than they have been for a while. And who knows what the Knicks' motivation is going to be for that particular game. So that needs to play itself out. But if you're looking at the standings right now, and you say, okay, as it is, Toronto, 2 games left. Atlanta, 2 games left. Toronto has the tiebreak over Atlanta. That's my understanding of it. So if Atlanta splits, Toronto can split. Of course they can. They got the layup against Brooklyn, and I'm not discounting their chances of beating the Knicks either, because we just don't know what Knicks team is going to show up and what version of the Knicks is actually going to be available for that particular game. So the thing that needed to happen has happened. The Cavs beat the Hawks. Toronto did what it needed to do against Miami. And now all of a sudden, the basketball gods are looking out for me and giving me an opportunity to potentially go to Toronto in the springtime as opposed to January. The last time that I was in Toronto in spring was way back during the LeBron James era. And there are few cities that are as great as Toronto when you're talking about spring. I'm not talking about January. January, oh my God, you don't even want to go outside. You just stay in your hotel room as much as possible or just walk through the path. They call it the path. They're indoor walking. But Toronto in spring, man, I have been hoping deep down that there would be a possibility of that. And it is too close for me to call, but I will say this, guys. I am not yet ready to cancel that Toronto hotel reservation that I have booked. Come on, Miami. You can do this. You can do this, Miami.
Well, we were joking before the pod. Perhaps the most important instance of veteran leadership in modern NBA history is CJ McCollum managing everyone's Saturday night schedule when the team gets to Miami. In all seriousness, the Heat do look like they're not going to have a ton to play for in that game. Like, they're 2 games back of Charlotte right now. Looks like they're going to be stuck in 10th. That does decrease my confidence in a Miami upset there. A lot of variables at play.
Can I throw a wild card for Orlando? What about Orlando?
I'm dizzy.
Orlando's on a 4-game winning streak, and their final 2 games are Chicago and Boston. By that time, Boston might have 2 locked up. I'm just saying. Like, we saw Baylor Shireman go nuts. But no Jason Tatum, no Derek White, no Jaylen Brown, no Keita, maybe, possibly. Are we discounting Orlando? Am I going to Disney?
The real important thing about that game is that the Cavs are looking much closer to being locked into 4 now instead of 3. I mean, like, if we're talking like ESPN BPI or one of those analytics models I don't understand, the Cavs championship percentage was probably swinging by significant degrees during that fourth quarter just because the Celtics are so seasoned and battle-tested. Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, I looked this up the other day for a story I wrote, have won 13 playoff series as a duo. Played in 19 based on playoff experience alone. That's a lot for the Cavs, who have won 2, count them 2, playoff series together as a core to handle, and they're integrating Harden, Keon Ellis, Dennis Schroeder on the fly here. That to me is like the big takeaway of schedule watch. Schedule watch makes my head spin. It was enough for me to try to figure out the Knicks Cavs 3-4 seed tiebreakers or scenarios. Throwing the 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 double stack sandwich at me, that's too much.
It's a good thing we're not here to discuss this, right? This is not what we planned to talk about today.
I don't know about you guys, but I am excited. I cannot contain my excitement right now.
While we're here, we should try to figure out 3, 4, 5 in the West. Put a cherry on it.
Let's really not. The last thing I want to talk about when it comes to the standings, when it comes to the postseason playoff picture, if we get New York, Boston in round 2 in the Eastern Conference semifinals, that is exciting. That is another 7-game series that I could be extremely behind based on what I saw tonight. Even though Jaylen Brown didn't play for the Boston Celtics, it looked like a great playoff caliber game. Come to find out, Josh Hart shooting 40% from 3 this year. Who knew? And the New York Knicks are just looking like they want to prove that it wasn't a blip, wasn't a fluke, that they beat the Boston Celtics last year. Boston obviously wants to get their get back. That's something that I have circled on my calendar for potential second round playoff opponents. And obviously, we talked about it on this podcast. I would love to see Cavs and Detroit Pistons in the second round for multiple reasons. But again, that's not what we're here to discuss. We are here for this week's episode of Hey Chris, where we answer questions from our Subtext subscribers. You can become one of those insiders by subscribing for 14 days free or $3.99 a month. You get exclusive coverage directly to your phone from me, Chris, and Jimmy when it comes to information that we're getting that's not always readily available on social media, whether that's X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever we are posting information. Subtext gets it first and gets more in-depth detail than some of these social media platforms. But here, let's get into the first question. This one is a quick and easy one, guys, so you guys don't have to worry about it. I'ma handle this one. This one comes from Mitch in Sparks, Nevada. He says, what is the Cavs' defensive rating with Dean Wade, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen on the floor? And guys, per NBA.com stats tracking data, over 21 games played in 172 minutes this season, the trio of Jared Allen, Dean Wade, and Evan Mobley have a defensive rating of 96.8 per 100 possessions. The offensive rating, 117.9, for a net rating of plus 21.1. While we're on the topic of defense, I wanted to get into this in-depth question anew from San Francisco. He always comes in with the stats, the details. Here we go. We have talked a lot about three-point defense and rebounding as issues for the Cavs. I was hoping you guys expand on the free throw dynamics. I feel like it is an underappreciated playoff liability. According to Basketball Reference, the Cavs are middle of the pack, number 14 on free throw attempts, and complaining they should get more calls. But they are number 20 in free throw percentage. I am worried about letting teams back in playoff games by not hitting free throws in late game situations, which has already played out in the regular season. Chris, Jimmy, I think this is really interesting, especially after conversations we've had on this podcast, particularly about Evan Mobley and the Rocket Arena vibe that happens every time Evan Mobley steps to the charity stripe. There is a sense of anticipation, a stress level that increases, and silence that fills the room. And it's not to give him a little bit more room to work, it's because they don't know if he's going to be able to knock down one. What is your guys' takes, especially with Donovan Mitchell and James Harden being two guys who can get to their shots and their spots whenever they want?
Well, here's the thing. The Cavs, given how much they drive to the basket, they certainly probably should have more free throw attempts than what they do. Donovan Mitchell, James Harden, those guys come to mind. The thing is, like, Jarrett's not the most forceful player inside. Evan Mobley's not the most forceful player inside. So they're going to get free throws, but it's just, I don't know, it's interesting because I feel like if you're Wemby, if you're Joel Embiid, like, those guys are going to force contact and they're going to force whistles from the official and they're going to kind of like force their hand a little bit. That's just not the style of Jarrett. I feel like Jarrett and Evan, for the most part, are more finesse style bigs. So yeah, they're going to get their share of calls, and I wonder if teams are going to start following Evan on purpose. Felt like Atlanta was kind of doing that when he was getting touches underneath the basket, very close to the rim late in the game, and they're like, all right, if you're going to beat us at the free throw line. I don't think it's going to be hack a Drummond or hack a Mitchell Robinson or anything along those lines. But I do think it's going to be fascinating because I do think opponents understand that Evan, as a free throw shooter, can certainly be up and down. There are nights where maybe he goes 7 of 10 from the free throw line, and there are other nights where he might go 3 of 10 from the free throw line. But I do think the thing that the Cavs have to understand, Evan, Jarrett, Donovan, James, they're not going to get a friendly whistle in the playoffs, more than likely. This is also a high-volume three-point shooting team. So the style of play, I think, sometimes dictates how a team gets officiated and what they can get away with. And that reputation that the Cavs have, whether it's fair or not, is a little bit more of a finesse team, a little bit more free-flowing, three-pointers from the outside. In some ways, it's very similar to the Golden State Warriors of the Dynasty era, where they would complain about how physical Memphis was with them, how physical Houston was with them at times, because the way that the Golden State Warriors ran their offense, it wasn't so much attacking the rim. It wasn't so much getting the ball inside and allowing whoever your post-up guys are to work their way toward the paint. It was kind of with ball movement and body movement and off-ball stuff and coming around screens and whatnot. And one thing that we do see is that the away from the play stuff is a little bit looser in terms of how they officiate it. So I do think there's going to be times throughout the course of this playoff run where the Cavs are going to get an unfriendly whistle, or what they believe is an unfriendly whistle. I do think there are going to be times where the Cavs are going to be frustrated by it as well. But I think the kind of reputation that they have, I think it's different than OKC. It's certainly different than San Antonio. I think there are certain teams in the NBA, because of their style and because of their reputation, whether it's fair or not, they get away with a little bit more than what maybe the Cavs will be able to get away with. Detroit is the same kind of way.
Part of it is that, but it's also just like you earn that reputation for a reason, right? Like aside from James and Donovan on this team, there's just not a ton of guys who, I guess, maybe Evan plays a style that is conducive to drawing a lot of fouls, but a lot of like Jared Allen is more of a play finisher than he is a driver, right? James Harden's arrival, frankly, has turned Evan Mobley into more of a play finisher than a driver. He's still more of a driver than your average big, but he's more of a play finisher. Donovan and James are the only guys, and I just looked this up on Cleaning the Glass. The Cavs are an 84th percentile free throw rate team when Harden is on the court. So I think that 14th overall number, that I would be interested to see. Didn't have time to look this part up, but like, what are their team numbers since Harden got here? You can see even Harden's not the same. He doesn't have the same burst that he used to. He doesn't, frankly, attack as often, right? He's got more of a float game now. He doesn't go all the way to the rim as often, so he's not quite the same free throw king that he once was in his prime. But he still knows how to game the system. He's still. I mean, have you ever seen somebody get fouled on 3-point attempts more often than this guy? You forget that there's a reason why teams guarded him so funky when he was playing with Houston, right? Like people were behind him, people were on the side. It's a whole thing. And if half a decade later, almost a full decade later, he still has all the tricks. So he will help raise the floor on free throw attempts, though. Even that stuff, game the system stuff, they try to cut down on calling that in the playoffs as well. I think since Harden got here, Donovan's free throw numbers have been up. I don't know how coincidental or not that is. Maybe he's teaching Donovan some tricks of the trade. Donovan's been trying to, throw his body at the rim a little bit less this year, and yet his free throws are higher than they've ever been. That's kind of interesting. But overall, those are going to be your two guys who create those kinds of opportunities. The rest of this team is shooters and play finishers.
Jimmy, I don't know if you remember the conversation we had during the Atlanta Hawks game the other day, but Donovan Mitchell was like getting ready to check back in. It was walking to the scorer's table. It was like mimicking his own moves. And he was going through a dribble series with an air basketball and an invisible air basketball, and ended the series by going through like a mini motion of him foul baiting, like pretending to bring his arms up to create a foul call. And I was like, that's interesting that his immediate reaction would be to practice that, because that's not necessarily what he was known for a majority of his career.
Drawing fouls is a skill. I also think there's another point here that aside from Donovan and James, who is difficult for the defense to guard off the dribble? The reason why Shai Gilgeous-Alexander gets as many free throws as he does is because he's very difficult to guard. Yeah, there's some other foul baity stuff. Yeah, there's some stuff where he's gaming the system and he's initiating contact and stuff. But he's very difficult to guard. Very difficult. Same thing with Jalen Brunson. Same thing with Luka Doncic. These guys tend to get these calls because defenders are off balance, because defenders are on their heels, because defenders are chasing them from behind, because those guys get a first step on them, or they create separation and the defender's trying to close it down any way possible. So aside from Donovan and James, who else is attacking the defense off the dribble that is problematic for an opposing defense? It's certainly not Sam Merrill. It's not Max Strus. It's not Dean Wade. It's not Evan Mobley. Nobody's worried about Evan Mobley's handle in terms of if he has to create on his own. So I just don't know, besides Donovan and James, I just don't know who the Cavs have on the offensive end of the floor that is difficult to guard, that opponents feel like, hey, like we probably have to foul a little bit, or we probably have to be more physical, or we're more off balance, or, we're in rotation, or things along those lines. So I think that's part of it too. How many guys do you have that the defense is really worried about in terms of attacking off the dribble? How many guys on your roster do you have that are very, very difficult to guard? It's hard to guard Sam Merrill because you have to chase him around all these screens, and he's really, really smart, and he can run a two-man game with Evan Mobley. And the same thing when it comes to Max Strus. So they put a different kind of stress on a defense, but it's not the kind of stress on a defense that usually lends itself to free throw attempts.
Given the way their team is constructed around two high usage creators and, everyone else kind of flows in behind them, this is never going to be a super high free throw team because of that roster construction. They have gotten better at this. On the long list of reasons why the Darius Garland James Harden trade was made, like Darius Garland's career high in free throw attempts per game, I think is like 4.7. And James now at 36 during the regular season, of course, he's getting like 6 a game. You're pricing in low-hanging fruit, 2.5 points per game, essentially, assuming James is going to hit those at a pretty good clip, right? I know that it's not a strength, and when you don't see a strength, fans look at that with concern. They have gotten better here. They are a better place to draw fouls in the playoffs than they were a year ago.
Speaking of James Harden and the way that he plays and how he can manipulate the game, one of the main reasons that the Cavs went and acquired James Harden was because of his pace of play, was because of how he can slow the game down and utilize his game flow to make the defense react to whatever he's going to do and then find different options because of that. So this gets into the next question from our subtexters, Pranav in Columbus. He says, I've been around long enough to know that in the playoffs, you can count on a slower pace and a shorter rotation, but I'm not exactly sure why this happens. How much of it is because of a higher level of play, and how much of it is because that's just how things are done? Any good counter examples of champions who play more players and keep the pace up? Maybe not champions, but teams that play with a high level of pace and still are productive. You can look at the Indiana Pacers from last year. I think that's a good example of a team that did not allow the precedent of the playoffs to dictate how they were going to play the game. And to Jimmy's point from a recent podcast, he asked the head coach for the Atlanta Hawks, Quinn Snyder, about this very question, about how they dictate their own speed rather than allowing themselves to change based on how the game is being played by the opponent. Chris, Jimmy, what are your thoughts on why the game slows down and why shorter rotations have become known when it comes to the playoffs?
Well, I think there are a couple of answers. I think the first one that comes to mind is that you're locked in on one opponent, their strengths and their weaknesses, and you're using specific tactics and you're using specific lineups to combat that particular opponent. So there's nothing that a team is going to run, or there's nothing that a team is going to do that's really going to catch you off guard by the end of a 7-game series. It turns into a game of execution. It turns into a game of, can you exploit the weaknesses of that opponent? Like, do you have the kind of personnel? Do you have the kind of style to exploit those particular weaknesses that they have? The other thing is, I think it slows down a little bit more because possessions are more precious, and the faster you play, the more mistakes you could theoretically make. And teams play harder in the playoffs. Some of the transition buckets that you get because teams are arguing with officials, or because teams are just not interested in getting back on defense, or teams have these communication breakdowns and stuff like that. I think the focus, I think the attention to detail, I think the scouting reports, I think all of that stuff is amplified when you get into the playoffs. And it makes it hard to consistently generate these easy baskets in transition, because for the most part, teams aren't as sloppy with the details and whatnot when you get into the playoffs. And if you are sloppy with the details when you get into the playoffs, guess what happens? You lose. You lose that series. So I do think Indiana is a good example because the kind of stress that they put on you, I think Atlanta can put that same kind of stress on you. But the faster you play, the quicker you want to push it up ahead, the more danger you put yourself in. The less control you feel like you may have of the outcome of a specific possession. I think the Cavs feel like they can slow it down and they can turn it into a half-court game because they can execute in the half court. Because what they do in the half court kind of separates themselves because they have Donovan Mitchell, because they have James Harden, because they have those guys making the primary decisions. And whether there's 14 seconds on a shot clock or 4 seconds on a shot clock and it's ticking down, I think the Cavs believe, it's not always the case, but I think the Cavs believe that the guys that they have driving their offense are going to create good opportunities, quality shots, and good offensive possessions. If you flip it to the Atlanta Hawks, they don't have that same luxury. So they feel like, hey, like we have to play a little bit faster. We have to get a defense on their heels. We have to search for easier baskets because sometimes we can get bogged down in the half court and not really have a consistent, reliable solution to get quality offense in those kinds of situations.
Yeah, the game is slower because teams are better, essentially. They're better at taking care of the ball, which means fewer turnovers, which creates fewer fast breaks. They're more engaged. There's, as Chris said, hit-ahead passes a little bit less effective. Teams are back. But yeah, I would even say the offensive execution is better. So you have to take the ball out of the net sometime and scoring goes down. But when you have to take the ball out of the net, that means those possessions are going to be longer too. And then shorter rotations are just simply the better players play more in the playoffs. Yeah. And then your back end rotation guys, their weaknesses are amplified and coaches are shorter on patience. I would float. I think this is probably going to be how it pretty much always is, but particularly because I was looking this up, wondering about this year with, the Pacers' influence and what they were able to accomplish last year. Tyrese is a special one-of-a-kind pace engine, but would other teams look to that? This year, basically 8 of the top 10 teams in pace are just bad. So that's really interesting to me. I think pace is up across the board generally, but the super fast teams have been not very good. So it's hard to apply that theory this year. Conceptually, though, I wonder if this offensive rebounding trend might also explain why we don't see as much pace in the playoffs, because for such a long time, offensive rebounding has been viewed as such a risky proposition, right? If you're sending 2 or 3 guys to the rim after a shot, those are 2 or 3 guys that you don't have in transition defense. So teams would just basically for a while abandon offensive rebounding, commit completely to getting back on defense. Thus, you have fewer transition opportunities, right? Now, teams are kind of doing deep dives and realizing that, well, if you crash a certain way and you pick your spots and your spacing, it's pretty deep and in depth, you can crash the boards and try to get back on defense. So I wonder if that will inspire teams to maybe try to recognize that in the teams that do crash and try to hit more transition opportunities this postseason.
The other reason that rotations are shorter in the postseason is because every coach has a different level of trust with different players. And we've talked throughout the course of this season how there are certain stretches where Kenny Atkinson may call on Keon Ellis, or may call on Max Strus, or may call on Naquan Tomlin, or Craig Porter Jr., or Jalen Tyson. And that guy has to be ready to contribute and execute a specific role that has been outlined for that guy. And it's very possible that that goes well. It is possible that that goes well. It's also possible that that's a disaster. And if you're a coach, am I willing to risk that? Or am I just going to go down with my best players playing a large chunk of those minutes? Because the wrong decision with the wrong guy, a bad stretch from Naquan Tomlin, or a bad stretch from Jalen Tyson, or a bad stretch from Craig Porter Jr., it could cost you a series. Because the margins in the playoffs in a 7-game series are often very, very razor thin. And if you're a coach and you have to deal with the after effects of those losses, and those are haunting you throughout the course of the offseason, usually you want to say, well, I went down with my best guys controlling the outcome of the game. Not necessarily an end of rotation guide that I got a little bit cute with in terms of a 1-minute stretch where I was looking for something and that backfired. Think about the Golden State Cavs series. I know I always bring that up, but so many Cavs fans can relate to that. Remember when Steve Kerr went to Anderson Varejao and he got cooked over and over and over again? He got cooked by Kyrie, and that was costly. That was very, very costly. So those kinds of moves, they can go well. We've seen them go well, but they can also backfire. And when they do backfire, those are the ones that people really point at, and those are the ones that people criticize. And for a coach, there's probably just more trust and more comfort in terms of trying to avoid those kinds of situations altogether. Like it's more likely to be a disaster for somebody like Craig Porter Jr. than it is for, Max Strus. It's more likely to be a disaster for somebody like Naquan Tomlin, no offense to him, but just his experience, his game, the weaknesses in his game, the fouls that he commits because sometimes he gets out of control. Like, it's more likely for that stretch to be a disaster for him than it is for Keon Ellis or Dennis Schroeder or somebody like that.
All right, guys, let's get to the final question from our subtexters for today's episode. This one comes from Max in Lebanon, Ohio. He says, "Hey, Chris, if the Cows get bounced early this year, is Kenny Atkinson on the hot seat? Is Kobe Altman if they can't get out of the first round? Lots of talk about blowing this roster up, but would it go deeper than that?"
The answer to this question is yes to everything. Everything. Kobe, yes. Dan Gilbert, yes. Other members of Kobe's front office, yes. Evan Mobley, yes. Jared Allen, yes. Donovan Mitchell, yes. If this goes bad in the playoffs, there are going to be drastic changes to this organization. And I don't know which one is going to be the prevailing one. I don't know which one the decision makers are going to look at and say, this is the problem, this needs to be corrected, this is the button that we're going to push right now. But this is a team with a championship window of now. This is the highest priced roster in the NBA. This is a team that traded 7 years, maybe, of Darius Garland's prime for James Harden's maturity, James Harden's professionalism, James Harden's readiness. This is a team that has big time pressure going into the playoffs. There is no team in the NBA that is under more pressure to advance deep into the playoffs than the Cavs. A close second is probably the New York Knicks. But beyond that, it's the Cavs because of the contract situation of Donovan Mitchell, because of the trade that they made at the deadline, because of everything that's happened in the playoffs in recent years. Everything would be on the table for the decision makers of this organization. Yes to everything.
My only pushback would be Kobe, not based on necessarily merit, because I mean, if you preach patience for half a decade and you never get out of the second round, then what were we waiting for? So I would understand if that's a line of thinking that the Cavs took after another disappointing playoff exit, hypothetically, if that happens, right? I just think that because we acknowledge that there's so much other change that will happen if this happens, happen. Like, wouldn't you want someone you trust running the controls? Maybe you're losing trust in him. That's part of this conversation. But it would be wild to me to hire a new GM and say, okay, immediately blow this roster up, but keep it a contender. That's a lot. Kind of sounds like a fun job if I'm a free agent GM. But I guess what I'm saying is you would want to have a really good succession plan if you're going to fire Kobe. You're not firing Kobe just because, like, you didn't get the job done and this, like, by virtue of, again, merit. Like, you said you were going to deliver this, you didn't deliver this, you got to go. Because the moves are so delicate that you would have to make after that, I wonder if there would be some hesitancy there. Other than that, I'm with Chris. Like, everybody's future is at stake in this playoff run. There's no one you can point to and say this person is safe if the Cavs exit early.
The fascinating thing about Kobe is he has done a good job. Dan Gilbert and him have worked together, and there is a trust that has been built for more than a decade. Before Kobe, there was no general manager that had ever gotten a contract extension. Kobe's gotten multiple ones. So there is a belief that Dan has in Kobe. There is a trust that those two guys have built. So I do think it would take a lot for Dan to go a different direction. At the same time, it's just hard to completely discount that possibility. If things go wrong, and that's the big ... here, if things go drastically wrong in the playoffs, and we're still in a situation here, 2 games left in the regular season. To me, there's only one team in the Eastern Conference that I would pick to beat the Cavs in a 7-game series. So as much as people are looking at these hypotheticals, the possibility of these hypotheticals actually playing themselves out I just don't feel like that probability is high. I don't. Because the Cavs don't, well, if the standings hold, and it feels like much of the standings will hold, the Cavs don't have to play Boston until the conference finals. Losing in a potential conference finals, a competitive conference finals series to the best team in the Eastern Conference that got Jason Tatum back before a lot of people expected, that has to be part of the decision making. That has to be part of the equation. You can't just turn a blind eye to that reality. And if the Cavs lose in a competitive conference finals, the feeling around this team, it's a lot different than if you lose in the conference semifinals to a team that you shouldn't lose to. You know what I'm saying? Or at least the belief is from the decision makers in the organization, you shouldn't lose to. So I do think a lot of people are throwing out these hypotheticals, and I understand why these questions are being asked because you have to look at every possibility. But I just don't think it's a high probability, and we'll see. We'll see what happens in the playoffs, and obviously these are fluid things, but as of right now, I just don't feel like it's a high probability that this version of the Cavs flames out the way that last year's did. I just don't feel like it's a high probability that this version of the Cavs flames out the way that the 2023 team did. I just don't see that. So I don't think we can lose sight of that reality, despite all the ups and downs, despite the roster upheaval, despite the questions surrounding this team. There are questions about Boston, even Boston being the favorite in the Eastern Conference. There are questions about New York. There are questions about Detroit. So the Cavs aren't the only team with these questions to answer going into the playoffs. And like I said, there's one team. If I'm picking the Cavs throughout the course of their playoff run, there's one team that I would pick right now to beat them in a 7-game series, and that's a pretty good place to be going into a playoff run.
I wanted to give a shout out to all the Subtext subscribers. I know we did not get to every question on today's episode, but thank you guys for making sure you sent in your weekly questions. Max, Anu, Pranav, but also the people whose questions we didn't answer. Lloyd, James, we have conversations with you guys daily on your phones, and that's what makes Subtext special. It allows you to have conversations where even if we don't cover a topic on the podcast, we can have these conversations, answer your questions on Subtext directly to you in one-on-one conversations. So, with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can send in your weekly Hey Chris questions, or as I mentioned, just have daily conversations with all of us to get your questions and insight to get your questions answered and all your insight that you might need on the Cleveland Cavaliers. The only way to do so is signing up for a 14-day free trial or visiting cleveland.com/Cavs and clicking on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who signed up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.